The uncle's deception. The last day of 4th grade should have been a joyous occasion, filled with the promise of summer freedom and childhood adventures. Instead, it became the day that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, a day when my innocence was shattered and I came face to face with the darkest depths of human depravity. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school year, I joined my classmates in a chaotic rush to the exit. The air was thick with excitement, laughter, and the occasional tearful goodbye. I scanned the crowd of waiting parents, searching for my mother's familiar face. She had promised to pick me up, as she always did on the last day of school. That's when I heard it, a voice calling my name. Tommy. Tommy. I turned to see a man waving at me, his smile too wide, his eyes glinting with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. As he approached, he introduced himself as Dennis's uncle, claiming he was there to pick me up. A seed of doubt took root in my mind. Dennis was my best friend, but he wasn't in my class this year. We had plans to celebrate the start of summer together, but I hadn't expected him to be involved in my pickup. Still, the man seemed to know who I was, and in my childish naivety, I pushed aside my misgivings. I approached Miss Blue, my teacher, and informed her that I was being picked up. She asked where my ride was, and I pointed to Dennis's uncle. Miss Blue's gaze lingered on the man for a moment, but she nodded and dismissed me. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a terrible mistake. The man led me through the crowd at a pace that was almost frantic, his hand on my shoulder guiding me with a grip that was just a little too firm. His speech was rapid and jittery, words tumbling out in a nervous stutter as he explained that Dennis's dad was working late, so he was driving me to their house. It wasn't until we reached his car, a dark red hatchback that seemed to absorb the light around it, that the gravity of the situation began to dawn on me. Where was Dennis? Why weren't we picking him up too? A cold knot of fear began to form in the pit of my stomach. As if reading my thoughts, the man turned to look at me in the back seat, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. Dennis is already at the house, he said, his voice taking on a strange, almost sing-song quality that made my skin crawl. The drive seemed to stretch on forever, the familiar landmarks of my town giving way to unfamiliar streets and houses. With each passing minute, my sense of unease grew. The man's incessant chatter filled the car. Asking questions about school, my friends, my family, information that now seemed far too personal to share. When we finally pulled up to a house, my heart sank. This wasn't Dennis's home. It wasn't anywhere I recognized. The man ushered me inside, his movements becoming more erratic, more aggressive. The click of the lock behind us sounded like a death knell. The interior of the house was dark, all the curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun. It felt like stepping into a tomb, the air thick and stagnant. "Where's Dennis?" I managed to ask, my voice small and trembling. The man's demeanor changed in an instant. The fake friendliness vanished, replaced by something cold and predatory. "Oh, I think he's downstairs playing video games," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Give me a second. Wait here." As he disappeared into another room, I heard the creak of a door and footsteps descending into what must have been a basement. Panic seized me. I knew, with the certainty that only comes in moments of true terror, that Dennis wasn't here. That I had been lured into a trap. My hands shook as I tried the front door, finding it locked with a mechanism I couldn't hope to open. Desperation fueled my next move. I spotted a phone on the kitchen wall and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Please come to this house," I whispered as soon as the operator answered. "I've been kidnapped." I didn't wait for a response, hiding the phone under a kitchen towel with the line still open. I had barely made it back to where the man had left me when I heard his footsteps returning. "Come down, Tommy," he called, his voice echoing up from the basement. "Dennis is down here." When I didn't respond, he emerged from the stairwell, his face a mask of false concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. Approaching me with slow, deliberate steps, fear made my voice quaver as I asked if I could leave. The change in his expression was immediate and terrifying. The friendly facade crumbled, revealing something dark and monstrous beneath. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist with bruising force. "I'll let you go if you stop and behave," he snarled, dragging me towards the basement door. I screamed and struggled, but it was no use. He was too strong, too determined. The basement was a nightmare come to life. Bare concrete floors, a single naked bulb casting sickly yellow light, and that support beam in the center. It was a scene straight out of every child's worst fears. The door slammed shut behind us. The sound of the lock turning like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. Time lost all meaning as I huddled in that basement, jumping at every creak and groan from the house above. The man's footsteps paced back and forth, a predator circling its prey. When he called down to ask if I was hungry, I refused, terrified he might discover the open phone line if he entered the kitchen. Just when I thought I couldn't bear another moment, I heard it, the blessed sound of the doorbell, followed by the authoritative pounding of fists on wood. The cavalry had arrived. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting voices, splintering wood, and pounding footsteps. When the basement door finally burst open, revealing a police officer silhouetted against the light, I felt a rush of relief so powerful it nearly knocked me off my feet. As I was rushed outside, I caught a glimpse of my captor being led to a police car in handcuffs. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, and the hatred I saw there chilled me to my core. It was a look that said this wasn't over, that somehow, someday, he would find me again. The aftermath was a whirlwind of police statements, tearful reunions with my parents, and endless therapy sessions. I learned later that the man was a work associate of Dennis's father. Someone who had used inside knowledge to orchestrate his sick plan. The thought that he had been watching me, planning this for who knows how long, still makes my skin crawl. Years have passed since that day, but the scars remain. I still flinch at the sound of a basement door closing, still feel a spike of fear when a stranger calls my name. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear footsteps creeping up basement stairs, coming to finish what was started on that last day of school so long ago. The man who took me might be out of prison by now. The thought keeps me vigilant, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if today might be the day he decides to fulfill the promise I saw in those hate-filled eyes. Because some monsters, I've learned, don't stay confined to the shadows of childhood nightmares. Some monsters walk among us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The abandoned school's secret, the last day of junior year should have been a celebration of freedom, a gateway to a summer full of possibilities. Instead, it became a descent into terror that would haunt us long after the final bell had rung. The day dawned dark and stormy, sheets of rain lashing against classroom windows as if nature itself was trying to warn us of the horrors to come. Our original plans for a beach day scuttled by the weather. My friends and I hatched a new scheme, one that would lead us into the belly of a long-abandoned elementary school on the outskirts of town. The building had stood empty for a decade, a crumbling monument to budget cuts and shifting demographics. Rumors swirled about its impending demolition, whispers of asbestos and structural instability that had kept it off limits for years. But to a group of restless teenagers looking for one last adventure before summer, it was an irresistible lure. Eddie, always the daredevil, was the first to suggest breaking in. "It'll be torn down anyway," he argued, his eyes glinting with mischief. "What's the harm?" We left school after lunch, piling into Eddie's beat-up Corolla with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The rain had intensified, turning the world beyond the windshield into a gray blur. It felt like we were driving into another dimension, leaving the safety of our normal lives behind. The abandoned school loomed before us, a hulking shadow against the storm-darkened sky. Overgrown bushes and trees partially obscured it from view, nature reclaiming what man had abandoned. Eddie parked in the back lot, hidden from prying eyes by the thick vegetation. With a baseball bat retrieved from his trunk, Eddie made short work of a classroom window. The sound of shattering glass was lost in a well-timed crack of thunder, as if the storm itself was conspiring to hide our transgression. One by one, we climbed through the broken window, tumbling into a classroom frozen in time. Desks stood in neat rows, gathering dust. Faded decorations clung to the walls, ghosts of lessons long forgotten. The air was thick with the musty smell of decay, and something else, a coppery tang that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We moved through the halls like intruders in a tomb, our phone flashlights casting long, distorted shadows. Each classroom we entered told a similar story of abandonment and slow rot. But there was something else, an oppressive feeling that grew stronger with each step we took deeper into the building. It was in a former kindergarten classroom that we first realized we weren't alone. A sound echoed down the hallway, not the creak of settling foundations or the patter of rain, but something deliberate. Something alive. We froze, killing our lights and holding our breath. In the darkness, I could hear the rapid beating of my own heart, so loud I was sure whatever was out there must hear it too. "Did you see that?" whispered Sarah, her voice trembling. She pointed towards the doorway, where something, a shadow, a shape, I couldn't be sure, had just retreated from view. Panic seized us. We ran blindly down the intersecting hallway, our footsteps thundering in the empty corridors. We found ourselves in what must have been the kindergarten wing, surrounded by tiny chairs and colorful murals now faded and peeling. Another sound echoed through the building, closer this time. We ducked into the nearest classroom, shutting the door behind us with trembling hands. Huddled in the darkness, we strained our ears for any sign of pursuit. The storm outside had intensified, each flash of lightning illuminating the room in stark, momentary clarity. It was during one of these flashes that we saw it, a face peering in through the narrow window in the classroom door. The lightning faded, plunging us back into darkness, but the image was seared into my mind. Pale, almost translucent skin. Eyes too large, too dark. A mouth stretched into an unnatural grin that seemed to split the face in two. "Do you work here?" Eddie called out, his voice cracking with fear. No response came. Just that face, still visible in the dim light, watching us with an predatory intensity that made my blood run cold. Eddie's nerve broke first. He lunged for the windows, fumbling with the ancient locks. One by one, we scrambled out, not daring to look back. As I prepared to follow, I chanced one last glance at the door. The face was gone. But now, impossibly, horrifyingly, it was at the window right next to me. Those two large eyes bored into mine, that grotesque smile widening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. I don't remember how I made it out of that window. The next thing I knew, I was running across the overgrown schoolyard, rain lashing my face, heart pounding in my ears. We piled into Eddie's car, tires squealing as we peeled out of the parking lot. No one spoke on the drive home. What could we say? How could we possibly explain what we had seen? In the days and weeks that followed, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a homeless person who had taken up residence in the abandoned school. Maybe it was just our imaginations, fueled by ghost stories and an eerie setting. But deep down, we knew the truth. Whatever we encountered in that school wasn't human. It was something old, something that had been waiting in the shadows for foolish children to stumble into its lair. The school was demolished later that year, the site cleared and turned into a park. But sometimes, when I drive past that spot late at night, I swear I can see a pale face watching from the shadows, that inhuman grin promising that our encounter was far from over. We may have escaped that day, but a part of me knows it was only because that thing let us go. It's still out there, waiting. And someday, when we least expect it, it will come for us again. The stalker's obsession, chemistry class during my freshman year of college was supposed to be just another hurdle on my academic journey. Instead, it became the backdrop for a nightmare that would consume my life and leave me forever changed. Zach sat next to me in class, an awkward, slightly overweight guy with a patchy beard and an encyclopedic knowledge of chemical formulas. At first, I was grateful for his help. Chemistry wasn't my strong suit, and Zach seemed more than happy to explain concepts, offer homework assistance, and even let me peek at his test answers. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. The way his eyes lingered on me a little too long. How he always seemed to find excuses to brush against me when reaching for lab equipment. But I was young, naive, and focused on maintaining my GPA. I ignored the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, telling myself I was just being paranoid. When Zach asked for my number to send homework-related stuff, I gave it without hesitation. It was a decision I would come to regret with every fiber of my being. On the last day of class, Zach blindsided me with an invitation for a date. Caught off guard and not wanting to hurt his feelings after a semester of academic support, I fabricated a story about a 2-week trip to Miami. It was a white lie, a gentle letdown that I thought would be the end of it. Couldn't have been more wrong. That night, as I celebrated the end of the semester with friends, the first cracks in Zach's facade began to show. Text messages demanding to know when I was leaving for Miami. Accusations of using him and discarding him now that I no longer needed his help. Each message more unhinged than the last. Fear began to gnaw at me as I realized Zach's interest went far beyond a simple crush. This was obsession, pure and dangerous. The next evening, as my friends and I were out at a local bar, a text from Zach made my blood run cold. "I thought you said you were going to Miami tonight." I scanned the crowded bar, suddenly certain I could feel his eyes on me. How had he known where I was? Was he following me? Before I could process the implications, another message arrived. "I just don't like liars." That night, as I returned home, exhausted and on edge, a knock at the door nearly stopped my heart. Zach's voice came from the other side, plaintive and threatening all at once. "It's me. I just want to talk," I shouted through the door, threatening him with my father's wrath. It seemed to work, for the moment. But as I huddled in my room, every creak of the house making me jump, I knew this was far from over. The next day, a novel-length text from Zach confirmed my worst fears. It was a rambling manifesto of perceived slights, declarations of our supposed chemistry, and thinly veiled threats. He spoke of the benefit of the doubt he was giving me, of coming to my house to talk in person. The words dripped with a mixture of entitlement and barely contained rage that chilled me to my core. I alerted everyone I could, family, friends, campus security. My father, enraged at the threat to his daughter, bombarded Zach's phone with calls and menacing texts. The police tried to contact him. But Zach had gone to ground. For weeks, I lived in a state of constant fear. Every shadow held the potential for danger. Every unknown number that called my phone sent my heart racing. I changed my routines, varied my routes to and from campus, always looking over my shoulder. Just when I thought the nightmare might be over, that Zach had finally given up, I received an envelope in my campus mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper with words cut from magazines and newspapers, like some twisted ransom note. "I gave you everything.